Today on The Divide, kids over 12 are now eligible to get a COVID vaccine.
It's exciting. It's overwhelming.
We ask you where the decision-making lies in your family. Plus, a bipartisan effort to thwart a planned Instagram for kids.
We have kids who are too young getting on Instagram already, and that Facebook has not found a way to prevent them.
Also, party purity is alienating an entire swath of voters, how the two-party system is slowly cementing its own demise. That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide.
Hello and welcome to The Divide. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today? I hope you yelled, "I'm great," at the screen, because Governor Jay Inslee, after so much waiting, more than a year, he has finally set a timeline to reopen the state, saying most of the economy will open back before or on June 30th, and it will happen even more quickly
if we obtain 70% of Washingtonians who are over the age of 16 who have at least initiated their first dose of the vaccine before then.
Meanwhile, this past week, kids over 12 also became eligible for a COVID vaccine, and some rushed with parents in tow to get one.
It's a little nerve-wracking. It's exciting. It's overwhelming. It's been a long year. Woo! So yeah, I mean, I'm just now feeling this.
Yeah, so there's a lot of news that broke this week, and a lot of news surrounding kids and vaccines. And some of you asked whether your child needs your approval in order to get a vaccine. That answer from the State Department of Health.
In general, adolescents under age 18, so through age 17, do need parent consent for most medical procedures in our state, including immunizations. And so there's many ways providers can do that. Parents don't have to be present, but they do need to give their consent.
Yeah, unless you're like emancipated from your parents, then that would be an exception. I was curious, though, even though you do ultimately need to sign off on your kid getting a vaccine, I was curious whether some of you are going to let your kids, though, make the decision for themselves about whether they want one, or whether you want to make that decision for them. So I posted one of my highly scientific Twitter polls. About 1,000 of you took it. I asked, will you decide whether your child gets a vaccine, or will you let them decide? The overwhelming majority of you who took the poll, 84%, said you will decide for them. But folks were still divided on how exactly this conversation might go in your households. Oliver told us, I will listen to their opinion, but ultimately I will decide. So a nice little chat. Taylor, Brandi, this is a ridiculous question. A child has no capacity to decide something like that. At Kilo Mike Alpha 77 said, my daughter is 17. Her father and I have discussed this with her and have left the decision to her. We will support whichever decision she makes. Andrew, parents decide what their kids will do when the kid is still a minor. That's called being a parent. Another Andrew here, I genuinely think it depends on the child, their age, maturity, etc. As parents, we have to ask, is this something my child is capable of thinking critically about and making an informed decision? If the answer to that question is yes, then it is clearly their choice. That's a pretty comprehensive way to think about it. There is, of course, another question about if or when schools, so the government, might ultimately require kids to get the COVID vaccine. So we already know that that's happening at both private and public colleges and universities. The University of Washington, Washington State University, Pacific Lutheran University, they're all requiring proof of a COVID vaccine in some form. One viewer asked me on Facebook, how long until they require COVID vaccines for K through 12 students to go to school? Now, as you guys know, if you've had kids that have gone through the public school system or are currently in it, public school students are already required to submit proof of immunity or vaccinations for a variety of things. I mean, chickenpox, MMR, hepatitis B, just to name a few. But the COVID vaccines are different because they have yet to be fully approved by the FDA. Remember, they've only been given this emergency use authorization. So the Washington State Board of Health, which would ultimately be part of this decision-making, told the Seattle Times the board would not require a COVID-19 vaccine for school entry until it is approved by the FDA and recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So, no for now. So for now, the time being, until that full FDA approval comes through in the recommendation, K through 12 public schools will not require the vaccine. But I will say, don't be surprised if it does get added to the list of requirements sometime down the road. So hopefully that answered a few of the questions you have pertaining to kids and vaccines and how all that was going to work. I'm sure a lot will develop, but there was a lot of news to take in on that front this past week. And also, just turning the page a little bit, but kind of on the same topic, there's another story I wanted to get to today on the subject of our kids. Instagram for kids. Apparently, this is something that Insta's owner, Facebook, is considering. So regular Instagram can already be used by kids over 13, but Instagram is now apparently hoping to tailor a platform to kids 12 and under. So this was an internal memo that was obtained by BuzzFeed News, and in it, Instagram's vice president of product wrote, again to staffers, "We will be building a new youth pillar within the community product group to focus on two things. A, accelerating our integrity and privacy work to ensure the safest possible experience for teens, and B, building a version of Instagram that allows people under the age of 13 to safely use Instagram for the first time." So that idea was not well received, I think, by the internet in general, but also by attorneys general across the country. 44 of them from both political persuasions sent Mark Zuckerberg a letter taking issue with the idea. In the letter, they detailed a variety of concerns that they have. For instance, the impact on mental health, which I will say is also true for adults who are on social media. Body image issues it could create, obviously privacy concerns for kids, possible predatory behavior, and of course the long-term consequences of having things you wrote or things you did on social media as a kid under 12 coming back to haunt you later in life. The letter concluded to Mark Zuckerberg, "It appears that Facebook is not responding to a need, but instead creating one, as this platform appeals primarily to children who otherwise do not or would not have an Instagram account. In short, an Instagram platform for young children is harmful for a myriad of reasons. The attorneys general urge Facebook to abandon its plans to launch this new platform." Among those who signed on to the letter was Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson. He and I spoke about his concerns related to an Instagram for kids.
Has there been a response from Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, I mean, I think what they says are they're looking at it and they're going to consider the letter. Look, what they need to do is go beyond that and just scrap the idea. I mean, to be clear, Facebook has a history of problems in protecting kids. For example, they had something called a Messenger Kids Service. This was just a couple of years ago, and they promised sort of a safe place where kids could communicate with other kids and only with individuals who their parents approved. Well, as it turned out, there was a design flaw with that product, and as a result, kids were in group conversations with adults who were strangers. So Facebook does not have a particularly good track record here. So I have deep concerns. In addition to all the problems that come with social media for preteens, the fact that it's Facebook trying to roll this out.
What we say to those who say this is just government overreach and that parents ought to control what their kids can be on if something like an Instagram for kids rolled out.
A couple of things. So one, as a parent, I agree that parents have responsibility, and that's something my wife and I take seriously with our kids, and I suspect that's the case for most parents. On the other hand, there is a role to play for government to say, hey, there is some limits when we know there are downsides, significant downsides to a certain product, where government does put limitations around that. And we do that all the time in all sorts of areas. It does seem to me that, do we need to have a cradle to grave social media life for every member of our community? It's insanity. And I just cannot believe that in pursuit of the almighty dollar, that we have to get preteens hooked on social media while they are still developing. They're just too young to really develop a sense of privacy, body images, cyberbullying. The list goes on and on and on. And that's even before we get to issues of child predators. And so this is an issue where I think, yes, there is a role to play. We are simply asking this company to eliminate this decision, to step aside from this. They don't need to do it, and they should do the right thing.
Yeah, and you said they don't need to do it. If they don't, if they just say, okay, kick rocks, we're going to do Instagram for kids, is there anything legally speaking that an attorney general like yourself could do?
I guess I'm gonna hold off on answering that. I guess what I would say is, and there's an easy way and there's a hard way for Facebook, right? And it's generally my approach to reach out to a business, and the way we are doing here with other attorneys general across the country is say, hey, think this over before you go forward. These are our concerns, and to lay that out. And it's my hope, and frankly, it's my expectation that Facebook will do the right thing.
When you say I'm going to hold off on commenting, that makes it sound to me like there's possibly a lawsuit that could happen.
I guess what I would say, Brandi, is one step at a time. But Facebook should know that I take this very seriously. My colleagues take this very seriously. This is an issue that we speak about, and if they choose not to do the right thing, this issue would have my attention, and we'll just see what happens going forward.
Is there any sort of advocacy you're going to do to lawmakers? Because it would seem as if a better venue for these types of concerns would be through action by Congress. So is there anything you're going to pursue to that end?
Yes, so members of our congressional delegation, for example, are aware of this letter that I've signed, and that'd be consistent across the country as well with other attorneys general. And yes, you often see AGs in a bipartisan way writing letters, for example, to members of Congress across the country, advocating for positions in favor or in opposition to different bills that impact people in our respective states. And I think you'll see a similar response here.
If you do succeed in some way, either Mark Zuckerberg says, you know what, you're right, or maybe there's some sort of litigation or there's laws by Congress, kids are already online all the time. I mean, I know a lot of parents who are like, here you go, here's the tablet. And, certainly there are restrictions, but kids are all over social media. Wouldn't this just kind of a drop in the bucket for what they're already exposed to?
I'm not naive. I agree with you that kids will work around as best they can if they're really determined to get somewhere. Again, I think that speaks to the problem that we have kids who are too young getting on Instagram already, and that Facebook has not found a way to prevent that, or really even to limit that in a meaningful way. That said, I don't think the solution, when there is that existing challenge that most certainly exists, say, well, let's just open everything up. Let's just create a whole app for this and just invite all kids to come on. That is the wrong response when you have an ongoing issue. And look, there's no way to sugarcoat this. Instagram has problems with child predators utilizing Instagram to go after kids. Like, this is very serious in terms of what we're talking about here for the health and safety of our children. And that's why this is such a bad idea.
Yeah, so obviously we'll stay tuned to what happens with this and how Mark Zuckerberg might respond. I will note, there is a lot we don't know about this sort of Instagram for kids idea. I mean, obviously, if it's a totally different platform, it would be different than the Instagram that you and I use, which is just completely out of control. What kind of privacy settings are in place? What kind of parental controls are in place? What kind of communication could you have with just people out there? Because obviously you don't want predators to be able to get on the account. How do you verify someone's age? I mean, so many things we don't know. And so personally, I would like to see what they intend to do and what that would look like before making too much of a judgment about it. Because like I told the Attorney General, there are a ton of platforms for kids already, things they can do on their tablet or whatnot. So I think there's a lot that we still need to know about it. But interesting that there was sort of this bipartisan pushback from attorney generals across the country, alluding to maybe a lawsuit down the road. So we'll see what happens with this. I am curious, by the way, on both of these topics pertaining to kids, vaccines for kids, sort of who gets to make the call, and then potential Instagram for kids, to get your thoughts. So make sure to email us, thedivide@fox.com. All right, coming up after the break. You remember CHOP, right? How could you forget? Well, apparently Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan's phone would like us to forget all about it. We'll discuss also, are party purity tests going to lead to the demise of the two-party system? Stick around. Y'all, something is afoot in the city of Seattle, or maybe it's not afoot. I gotta be honest, I really don't know. I don't know if you've seen these headlines. But apparently some text messages from Mayor Jenny Durkan are, just missing. Messages that could not only be critical to a lawsuit against the city, but messages that the press wants as part of public disclosure requests. Messages that happen to be from the so-called Summer of Love, the period of intense unrest in the city that ultimately led to a deadly occupied protest zone known as CHOP. And it's not just the mayor whose messages from that period have vanished. Apparently, texts are also missing from the former police chief, Carmen Best, the current fire chief, Harold Scoggins, and other top public safety officials from SPD. Huh. So all their messages just poof, same period of time, really important time in the city. So I met up with Mayor Durkan this week. Of course, we do a weekly interview. I got a chance to chat with her in person at a pop-up vaccine clinic in Fremont, and I tried to get some answers from her. 10 months of missing text messages. Was it intentional?
No.
What happened?
Based on what I've been told, I had 3 phones during this period of time, and sometime during that period of time, one of the phones was set to a retention period of 30 days. That's been corrected. It's for forever. You know, I have always believed that everything I do is public as mayor, and that everything's collected and archived. My emails, my calendars, my text messages. We found a gap, and we're going to fix that gap.
I have my retention period on my phone set to 30 days, but it's something I manually had to go change. Who changed that on your phone?
I don't know.
It was not you.
It was not me.
You know, I think one of the challenges people had with this, we saw the initial headline saying 10 months of text messages missing, and thought, yeah, maybe that was, an error. And then you're not the only one. Former chief of police, fire chief, 4 members of SPD's command staff, all have missing messages for various reasons during the same really consequential period. So how do we explain that to viewers and make it make sense?
I think a couple of things are really important to viewers. Is number one, as you know, Brandi, transparency is critical for people to understand what their government's doing. You guys are the first line of that, being independent accountability, but government has an obligation too. And so looking at everything we do, both how do we make records public, how do we maintain them, how do we archive them, and you'll see with me when we are able to, when through this litigation and the reviews, and be able to produce tens of thousands of emails and calendars and text messages so that people can see, they just hear this stuff is lost, but I think that they will see that there's a huge volume of information that will be produced. And also remember, they were seeing government live. I mean, Chief Best and I were having press conferences and TV interviews throughout the thing, answering questions. So I think you take those things all together and there will be a great understanding of what was going on.
A decision was made not to disclose the fact that the text messages were missing to media outlets who had requested them. Who made that decision not to tell the press?
So as you know, that I assume what you're asking is based on the report that Wayne Barnett did. Under the law, he sends that report to me and I have 60 days to make judgments about that report. And so until that is done, I can't comment on the underlying issues on that specific issue.
Yeah, so look, I don't know what happened here. I'm not going to make assumptions about what happened here. I do know that the city is trying to piece together the missing messages by looking at the sender. Is the sender a government employee? Can you get their version of it and put it together that way? So that's sort of the effort that's ongoing. So obviously we're going to keep our eye on this. There's a mayoral candidate who is asking the Attorney General to investigate. I spoke to Attorney General Bob Ferguson about this. He says that would require someone from the King County Prosecutor's Office asking them to hop in. That hasn't happened yet. So I think all of that is a little bit premature until we know exactly what's going on. Can the messages be recovered, etc. All right, moving on. I was all ready to scold the Snohomish County Democratic Party today, but then they sent me a really nice email, and so now I feel bad. We're going to do the story anyway, but maybe my tone will be a little bit different. So I was sent a copy of this form. Take a look. It is a form from the Snohomish County Democrats that they send to candidates who are seeking their endorsement. It asks them to answer a long list of questions. Most of them are pretty standard, like, why are you running? What are your qualifications? Why do you want our endorsement? So the questionnaire also asks a series of questions about certain policy positions to try to ascertain the candidate's position on key issues. Again, pretty standard stuff. Things like, what's your position on tax reform, universal health care, abortion, climate change? Again, all of it pretty standard when you're seeking an endorsement. But there was one question on that questionnaire, and it's the reason it was sent to me by a source, that really caught my eye. Perfect for this show. Here's the question. Are you a dino? How have your actions proven you a real Democrat? DINO, of course, stands for Democrat in name only. You've probably heard RINO, Republican in name only. This is the same thing. Other side. So are you someone pretending to be a Democrat? It was this last line, though. How have your actions proven you a real Democrat? Now, as I said, this was sent to me by someone concerned that it amounts to a purity test. That if you're not progressive enough, then there is no place for you in the Democratic Party. It seems to be a trend that is true for both major political parties, that if you're not lockstep, then you're a RINO, or in this case, a DINO, a sentiment that is no doubt alienating many potential candidates and voters who find themselves increasingly disillusioned with the two-party system. Now, I mentioned that the Snohomish County Democrats sent me a response to questions I had about that specific question in their questionnaire. And I was really glad to see, honestly, how thorough and thoughtful their response to me was. Greg Linberry, the Snohomish County Endorsement Committee Chair, wrote me a really lengthy email. And this is what he said in regards to use of the term DINO in that question. He said, a concern of both parties are individuals who really don't support the goals and values of the party, but claim to do so in order to better their chances at elections in areas that are heavy in one particular party affiliation. However, he went on to say that maybe it is worth reconsidering the question. He said, once we are finished with this election cycle, we will take a look at the questions, and it may be that this particular question causes too much confusion or requires a level of understanding that it isn't fair or appropriate for it to remain in future questionnaires. And hey, look, I can't argue with that. You know, it is their right, after all, to set the terms for who they will endorse. And I will say it's admirable that they realize that this particular question might alienate candidates who feel that they can't pass a party purity test, but they still want to pursue political office in order to help their communities. So I do want to say thank you to Greg for answering our questions and being willing to give that one question a second thought. All right, coming up, kind of on this same topic, we're going to switch to the other side of the aisle. The perils of party purity. My closing commentary is next. Congresswoman Liz Cheney might not be everyone's cup of tea in the GOP. Let's be honest, she's probably not Democrats' cup of tea either. They're just standing up for her right now because she's taken a stance against Trump. So Liz Cheney, like many Americans, and I'm sure some of you watching, finds herself in a political no man's land, unable to pass the purity test put forth by her own party, and certainly not ideologically in line with the other. And what was her crime, exactly, to be so unceremoniously ousted from her House leadership position? Well, Cheney did something that is apparently not only uncommon but unwelcome in today's political climate. She set her moral compass and she stayed the course.
I will not sit back and watch in silence while others lead our party down a path that abandons the rule of law and joins the former president's crusade to undermine our democracy.
Even under pressure, with her leadership position and possibly her seat in jeopardy, Cheney did not falter or fold. She stood her ground, a confidence of conscience that we used to not just respect, but expect of elected leaders in this country. Instead, now, we have elected leaders who make a mockery out of morality, who believe we must fit into a tiny little box that a big party created for us, or we simply do not belong. And look, I know some of you watching don't like what Cheney has to say about the former president, but this isn't just about her. We see on both the left and the right parties that are pushing further to the fringes, leaving behind the everyday Americans who they pretend to care about on the campaign trail. And the parties do so at their own peril. Because if voters can't pass your purity test, then they will be more than happy to find another party where they fit in. All right, thanks for joining us on The Divide. I'll see all of you tomorrow on Q13 News This Morning.